They found him under the broken gate fur matted with rain eyes fixed on something only he could see. The sky had been weeping all morning, heavy sheets of grey pouring over the cracked asphalt, pooling around the jagged edges of the abandoned lot. He didn't move when they approached, though his chest rose and fell with a quiet, almost imperceptible rhythm, like the echo of a heartbeat no one else could hear. I remember the first time I saw him, though. It feels like a dream I wasn't supposed to have. The puddles reflected his silhouette, tall and steadfast, each paw print a tiny monument in the mud. And in that instant, I knew that this story would break me and then rebuild me in ways I couldn't yet understand. The air smelled of wet earth and rusting metal. A faint breeze carried the scent of something charred, a hint of old fire from the lot next door, and yet beneath it all was the deep, earthy odor of fur and soil. His ears twitched, catching sounds I couldn't place, a soft whine trembling at the edges of his muzzle. He was alone, but he was waiting. I crouched beside him, careful not to startle, and I noticed the collar, torn and faded, hanging by a single thread, with a name that had been worn nearly invisible. Rex. The letters whispered of a life I would never know, of hands that had once held him and let him go. There was a stillness in him, a quiet knowledge that the world had already moved on without him, but somehow in this moment we had both found each other. Rain pattered against the hood of my coat, and soft percussion accompanied the slow unfolding of his story. He tilted his head, observing me with a gravity that felt impossible, in something so young, so battered. And then, almost imperceptibly, he shifted just enough to let me know he had chosen to trust. Not because he knew me, but because he had no other choice. I reached out my hand fingertips, hovering above the soaked fur, and he leaned in slightly. A shiver ran through him, not of fear, but of recognition that someone at last was seeing him. That single moment, stretched into eternity, felt like a promise that we would walk through the rain together, even if the rest of the world had forgotten how to care. Like, share, and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. This sets the cinematic, slow, emotionally immersive tone and introduces the German Shepherd immediately. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time I managed to coax him out from under the jagged gate. His movements were deliberate, like the pacing of someone who had learned patience through pain. Each step he took left a mark in the wet soil, a temporary signature of survival. I followed quietly, not wanting to disturb the fragile rhythm he carried like armor. He moved toward the edge of the lot, nose close to the ground, sniffing at every shadow and puddle, as if retracing memories only he could read. I couldn't stop myself from wondering where he had come from, what paths he had walked, what storms he had endured before this moment. The torn collar around his neck told a story of loss, but the way his eyes scanned the empty street suggested more than abandonment. It was the eyes of a dog who had seen the world turn cold and had learned to wait. A sudden gust lifted droplets of water into the air, causing him to pause, ears pivoting like radar dishes. His gaze caught on something far away, and I realized that his world existed entirely on instinct and memory. Perhaps he was remembering a home that had long ceased to be a family that had left him behind in some cruel accident of circumstance. Or maybe he had simply learned that no one would come for him, and so he had become his own guardian. As we walked along the rain-slick pavement, I began to notice the scars hidden beneath his dark fur. One ran along his left shoulder, a pale, jagged line that looked like it had been there for months. Another was a faint pink mark near his right hind leg, almost imperceptible unless you were close enough to feel the ridges with your hand. Each mark was a testament to struggling battles fought quietly against the world, or maybe against other creatures that had intruded into his life. There was no anger in him, only a quiet resignation. I thought about the name on his collar, Rex, and wondered if it had been called out by a child's voice long ago, soft and loving, or by a voice now gone. The thought made my chest ache. We often think of dogs as companions, but in moments like this they are also historians, keepers of lives and memories that we forget, archives of affection and pain etched into their muscles and fur. Rex carried all of it silently, without complaint. We reached the edge of the lot where the broken fence opened onto a street lined with forgotten houses. Paint peeled from the wood, the gardens overrun with weeds, windows dark and empty like eyes closed against the world. He hesitated here, sniffing the air, ears flicking to every sound. The distant hum of a car engine, the rustle of debris in the wind, the faint whisper of footsteps that could have been ghosts. It was a neighborhood abandoned not by people, but by memory, a place where lives had drifted away and left only echoes. I tried to imagine what he had done before I found him. Had he been chained here, left to the elements? Or had he wandered from a home long ago searching for someone who would never return? Each scenario seemed plausible, and yet neither explained the way he carried himself with such dignity, such quiet nobility. Even the mud caked on his paws didn't diminish the way he moved, as if every step were a statement of survival, a declaration that he had endured and would continue to endure. The sound of children laughing in the distance startled him briefly, and he froze, nostrils flaring. I watched as his body tensed, muscles rippled under the wet coat, and then slowly and carefully he relaxed again. He wasn't afraid of the sound, not exactly. He was remembering it, associating it with something he had lost. Maybe it had been his own human child or a neighbor's, or perhaps just the memory of innocence he had never truly known. I couldn't tell, but the way his gaze softened suggested a longing so profound it was almost tangible. We moved in silence for what felt like hours. I didn't try to speak to him. Words seemed unnecessary here. The city around us buzzed with distant life, cars' footsteps, the faint clang of a distant construction site. But within this space, in the fragile bubble of mist and memory, the only things that mattered were his steps and mine, the rhythm of our shared presence. I began to notice small details. The way his tail swished almost imperceptibly, a signal of tentative trust, the soft huff of his breath in the cool morning air, the tiny shiver that ran through him when a cold gust swept over the street. At one point he stopped and looked back at me. It wasn't a glance of invitation or command, but a quiet assessment of a question without words. Will you follow? Can I trust you? I nodded, though he couldn't see it, and stepped forward. That was enough. It had to be enough. As we reached a narrow alley that cut between two empty brick buildings, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. A scrap of cloth, faded and torn, caught on a nail. It was a blanket, soft once, but now stiff with mud and rain. He sniffed at it briefly, nose wet and black against the threadbare fabric, and then moved on, as if acknowledging a memory that was not meant for him anymore. I wanted to follow the story it held, to uncover the hands that had once wrapped him in warmth, but Rex was already pulling ahead, leading me through the shadows, through the quiet pulse of a world that had nearly forgotten him. And then I saw it. A small house at the end of the alley, windows, dark porch broken, a garden overgrown with weeds. Something about it made him pause, ears flicking back. And forth. He sniffed at the air again, nostrils flaring, muscles coiling with silent anticipation. It was impossible to know what he remembered, but the way he moved toward the house suggested familiarity, not necessarily comfort, but recognition. A trace of a past life, a whisper of belonging somewhere deep in his memory. I crouched again, letting him take the lead. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving only a fine mist that clung to every surface, a thin veil between the present and the past. I could feel it on my skin, cold and wet, mingling with the anticipation that had been building since I first saw him under the gate. Each step was a deliberate, slow unraveling of his story that I wasn't yet ready to hear in full. I didn't know his past. I didn't know what he had endured or who he had loved. But in that moment, as he paused at the threshold of the old house, I realized something profound. He had survived. Against the rain, abandonment, and silence, he had survived. And perhaps, just perhaps, he was ready to begin again. Not entirely whole, not entirely healed, but alive, waiting for the next chapter that we would write together. The house at the end of the alley had been abandoned for years, its walls sagging with the weight of neglect, windows fogged and fractured, and the front porch sagging like a tired sigh. Rex moved closer, his paws carefully and precisely on the wet wooden boards, ears low but alert, every muscle coiled with quiet recognition. I followed at a cautious distance, not wanting to startle him but needing to witness the fragile traces of memory that seemed to draw him forward. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew, the ghost of smoke from a long-forgotten fire still lingering faintly. Rex's nose twitched, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the corners of the porch along the edges of the walls, tracing invisible lines only he could perceive. His movements were deliberate, like someone revisiting a place that had once been home and had taken pieces of him with it. I realized then that survival was not just about food or shelter. It was about memory. It was about the places that had shaped you, the scents and textures that whispered of belonging even when the world had turned away. He paused at the threshold, paw resting lightly on the splintered wood, and stared at the darkness beyond. The interior was shadowed, filled with the scent of dust and decay, yet beneath that, there was something warmer, something faintly familiar. I could see him hesitate, head tilting slightly, ears flicking as though listening to echoes only he could hear. A soft whine escaped his throat briefly, and almost swallowed by the silence. It was a sound I would carry with me for years, a sound that spoke of longing, of waiting, and of survival. I knelt on the steps behind him, watching his body tense and relax with the rhythm of memories I could not yet grasp. The floorboards creaked under his weight, each sound a note in a symphony of recollection. He sniffed at a corner near the fireplace, nose tracing patterns in the dust, and I realized that something tangible had left its mark here. Perhaps it was a blanket, a toy with the scent of someone who had once been gentle. Whatever it was, it had left him with a silent map of the past, a guide to the life he had lived before the world had turned cruel. A sudden draft swept through the broken windows, rattling the shutters and stirring the remnants of torn curtains. Rex flinched but did not retreat. Instead, he moved deeper into the room, paused carefully on the uneven floor tail, low but steady. There were scratches on the walls, faint marks where furniture had once rested, perhaps where a child had clutched a corner in play or fear. The thought made my chest tighten. I imagined him here long ago, part of a household that had once loved him, and the ache of absence pressed into me like the cold mist that clung to the room. He paused near the remnants of a small rug, lifting his paw and pressing it lightly against the tattered fabric. I noticed a small indentation in the center, almost like the imprint of a hand or a paw softened by time. He sniffed at it repeatedly, nose wet and black nostrils flaring, then pressed his head to the ground, eyes closing for just a moment. I wondered what he remembered in that instant. Was it warmth, a scent of milk and blankets, or the quiet safety of a room where he had once felt that the world was his to navigate free from the harshness outside? The house seemed to exhale with him, the silence stretching into a fragile communion. I could feel the weight of years pressing down the unspoken history, pressing against my chest, making my own memories of loss and regret rise to the surface. I thought about the human capacity for forgetting, the way we abandon the places and beings that define us without realizing the depth of our absence. And then I looked at Rex standing there like a sentinel of memory, and I understood that he had not forgotten. He had carried everything with him, etched into his fur, into the rhythm of his heartbeat, into the way he breathed and moved. A faint sound drew my attention, and a soft scuffle from the room above. Rex's ears pricked, and he turned his head, scanning the shadowed staircase. I froze, unsure if it was a mouse, a rat, or perhaps some other inhabitant of the long empty house. Rex did not hesitate. He climbed the stairs slowly, paused carefully on the warped boards, every step deliberate, every movement a testament to his patience and awareness. He paused midway, sniffing the air, and I noticed a faint smell of old and bitter smoke clinging to the ceiling beams. Perhaps it had come from a stove, a candle, or an accident long forgotten. It was impossible to say, but he recognized it, and the recognition told me more than words ever could. On the landing, he stopped near a door that had been stripped of its handle, one side hanging slightly from its hinges. He pressed his nose against the frame, then padded slowly inside, eyes adjusting to the darkness. The room was small, with walls blackened by soot, and the floor littered with fragments of what had once been furniture, books, and toys. And then I saw a small crib, weathered and warped, but unmistakably a place where a child had once slept. His gaze softened, ears relaxed, and he stepped closer, nose brushing the remnants of the mattress. I could feel the tension leave his body, the hard line of survival softening just enough to reveal the memory he had been guarding so fiercely. This was the room where he had waited, watched, protected, and perhaps even loved. He lingered here, sniffing, pacing, pressing his nose against corners, and then lying down beside the crib, curling into the smallest, most vulnerable shape he could form, while still maintaining dignity. I knelt quietly in the doorway, holding my breath. There was no sound except for the faint drip of water from the roof, the quiet hum of the wind outside, and the soft exhalations of a dog steeped in memory. He was not just a survivor. He was a witness, a keeper of past love and loss. And in that moment I realized that I had stumbled into something sacred, a fragment of a life that the world had all but erased, and yet here it was, alive in him. The hours passed, though time felt suspended. I watched as he rested, shifting occasionally, pressing his head to the crib as if to assure himself that the past had once been real. And though I didn't know the details of how he had arrived at this lot, or how he had endured abandonment or injury, I understood that his story was only beginning to reveal itself. Every scar, every cautious glance, every slow, deliberate breath was a word in a sentence that I would spend weeks trying to read fully. I could feel the weight of my own memories pressing against me, regretting mistakes, love lost, and yet watching him, I realized that healing might be possible. Perhaps through witnessing his persistence and his quiet courage, I could learn to forgive and move slowly through life, with more attention to the fragility and beauty of each moment. And in that understanding, I felt the first tremors of hope stir soft and careful, like the first light of dawn filtering through broken windows. The mist outside had thickened, curling. Through the broken windows, like ghostly tendrils, Rex lay curled beside the crib, the small mattress beneath it compressed and indented from long past use, the air still carrying a faint scent of warmth and faint powdery sweetness that spoke of a life once lived here. It was in that quiet, suspended space that I first noticed her, though I did not yet know her name or if she even had one. A small shadow, nearly imperceptible, had slipped through the doorway from the alley outside. She was bundled in a thin, threadbare blanket, eyes wide and unblinking, and she moved with a kind of instinctive caution that seemed almost a mirror of Rex's own. The moment their eyes met, the room shifted in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. It was not excitement, not fear, but recognition. Two souls steeped in quiet endurance, both carrying the weight of absence, found each other without a sound. I froze, unsure if I should intervene. She was small, no more than a year old, with soft, downy hair and a faint smell of milk and earth. She knelt slowly on the floor blanket, pooling around her like a puddle, and extended a tiny hand toward Rex. He didn't move at first, just studied her nose, twitching eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing her intent. And then, ever so cautiously, he leaned his head down, brushing his muzzle against her fingers. A shiver ran through him, soft and deliberate, like a pulse of acknowledgement. I watched while holding my breath. The room was silent except for the faint drip of water from the broken ceiling and the soft exhalations of both child and dog. The girl reached again, more confidently this time, and Rex pressed closer, lowering his chest to the floor until their eyes were almost level. She placed her hand on his back, feeling the ridges of his scars through his wet, matted fur. He exhaled slowly, a deep, almost imperceptible sigh, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. It was the first time I had seen him relax completely. Not because I was there, or because he trusted me fully, but because she seemed to understand him without words, without expectation, without fear. Her presence did not demand anything. It simply existed as a quiet counterpoint to the long years he had endured alone. I realized then that she was not just a child. She was a reflection of the innocence he had lost, a reminder that life could still offer moments of tenderness, no matter how battered. The girl crawled closer to the blanket, slipping slightly, and nestled against his side. Rex shifted carefully, accommodating her small body with surprising gentleness, pressing his head against the floor, but leaving his back open for her to lean against. The rhythm of their breathing began to synchronize, slowly and deliberate, each inhalation and exhalation echoing the other. I could feel a bond forming in real time, fragile yet undeniable. I thought about the journey that had brought them here, each of them scarred in their own way, each carrying loss that no one else could see. Rex abandoned and battle-wore, a sentinel of memories and pain, the girl wandering alone or lost, clinging to a threadbare blanket, as if it were the only connection she had to safety. And here in this quiet, decaying room they had found each other. Not by accident, not by plan, but as if fate had left a delicate trail of crumbs for them to follow. I knelt on the floor beside them, hesitant, wanting to witness but not intrude. The girl rested her head against Rex's side, tiny fingers curling against his fur. He lowered his eyes, blinking slowly, a deliberate act of trust and acknowledgement. I noticed then the slight rise and fall of his chest. The way his tail twitched occasionally was a gentle reminder that even in vigilance he could allow tenderness. He had survived long enough to know the value of caution, but now he was learning the value of connection. Outside, the mist thickened, pressing against the broken windows and curling through the room like a living thing. The light from the grey morning filtered in through cracks in the boarded-up walls, casting muted patterns on the floor. I watched the soft interplay of light and shadow, and I realized that the room, once heavy with absence, now carried a trace of life, fragile but persistent. Their presence had shifted the energy infusing the room with a quiet, reflective hope that felt almost sacred. I tried to imagine what had brought her here. Had she wandered from a nearby home? Had someone failed to notice her absence, leaving her to find safety on her own? And more importantly, how had Rex known she would be here in this space at this precise moment? The questions circled in my mind without answers, and yet the mystery seemed irrelevant in the face of what was unfolding before me. Connection, trust, and the unspoken language of survival were all that mattered. The girl's hand shifted slightly, brushing against one of Rex's scars. He flinched momentarily, a soft twitch, but did not recoil. Instead, he remained, letting her touch him, as if granting permission to explore the story etched into his body. I felt my own chest tighten at the sight of the unspoken bond between them, resonating like a low hum in the quiet room. It was not protection in the conventional sense. It was a shared understanding of vulnerability, a mutual recognition of what it meant to have endured and survived. Time seemed suspended. Minutes stretched into hours, though I could not be sure, and the world outside faded into a blur of grey mist and distant muffled sounds. I watched as the girl shifted again, curling fully against his side, and Rex adjusted carefully not to disturb her, his body forming a protective arc around her small frame. Every movement was deliberate, precise, and infused with the wisdom of someone who had known danger, who had understood loss, and who had chosen in that moment to become a guardian. I could feel the weight of history pressing gently on the room, the years of abandonment, of fear, of quiet suffering, yet now there was a counterbalance, delicate and unspoken. In their shared silence, in the way their bodies fit together, there was a promise of something new. Not healing in an instant, not magic, not resolution, but a beginning. Recognition that life, even in its harshest forms, could still offer tenderness, care, and the possibility of trust. Rex shifted again, laying his head down fully on the floor, eyes half closed, breathing slowly and deliberately. The girl nestled closer, wrapping her small arms around his side, and for the first time since I had found him under the gate, he seemed entirely at peace. Not because the world had changed, not because danger was gone, but because he had found something worth protecting, something that could in its quiet way protect him in return. The morning light continued to filter in through the cracks, painting soft muted shapes on the floor. I stayed in the doorway, watching the delicate interplay of trust and recognition unfold. It was a moment that felt eternal, suspended between past and future memory and hope. And in that suspended quiet, I understood something fundamental. Sometimes the most profound connections are forged, not in grand gestures or loud declarations, but in the slow, deliberate act of showing up or waiting, and of allowing another being to see and be seen. The day stretched on light, shifting slowly through the broken windows, dust motes floating in the muted beams like tiny, drifting memories. I stayed on the threshold, hesitant to intrude, yet drawn into the subtle choreography unfolding before me. The baby remained nestled against Rex's side, her small fingers tracing the contours of his fur with deliberate care. He shifted, occasionally a soft grunt escaping his throat, but never enough to disturb her. Each motion was calculated, protective, as though he carried not just his own survival, but hers as well. I began to notice details that had eluded me before. The way his eyes followed her every movement, amber orbs darkened with concentration. The gentle rise and fall of his chest, timed almost perfectly with the soft rhythm of her breathing. Even the way his tail rested against the floor, moving ever so slightly when she shifted, spoke of a careful awareness, a mindfulness honed through years of vigilance. He was no longer simply a survivor. He was a sentinel, a guardian quietly recalibrating his world around her presence. The baby's blanket had slipped slightly, revealing the curve of her shoulder and the soft down of her hair. She shivered faintly in the cool mist that had begun to seep through the broken walls. Rex's head lifted slowly, ears flicking toward the chill, and he moved closer without hesitation, pressing his body against her to shield her from the damp air. The tenderness was almost imperceptibly subtle in its execution, but unmistakable. It was as though he understood that warmth, safety, and trust were gifts earned slowly, and he was willing to give them freely to this fragile new companion. I could feel a weight lifting off the room, not in a dramatic revelation, but in the quiet cumulative gestures that signaled a shift in the air. The house, once heavy with the smell of mildew and decay, now carried a trace of life subtle but undeniable. It was in the rhythm of their shared breathing, in the way they fit together in the corner near the crib, and in the tentative, unspoken dialogue of touch and gaze. I reached for my notebook, hesitant, but compelled to record these moments. Every breath, every subtle gesture seemed to carry meaning beyond the ordinary. Rex shifted again, nudging the baby gently with his nose, eliciting a soft coo in response. Her small hand pressed against his side, tracing the scars hidden beneath his dark, wet fur. Each scar was a story, and each stroke of her fingers seemed to acknowledge honor and soothe those stories simultaneously. It was not a magical connection. It was a profound, grounded recognition of shared vulnerability. Time passed in increments that were both immeasurable and infinite. I had lost track of minutes, yet I remained alert to every small change in their behavior. Rex's ears twitched at distant sounds, a car passing, a crow calling, the whisper of wind through the alley. But he remained rooted in place, attentive to the baby first, as though the world outside could wait while this fragile alliance solidified. I felt a strange combination of awe and reverence, watching the emergence of a bond built not on convenience or ownership, but on quiet, mutual trust and necessity. At one point, the baby shifted slightly, rolling onto her side, the blanket slipping. Further, and Rex lowered his head to press his muzzle against her back. She responded almost instinctively, nuzzling into his fur, and he exhaled slowly, the faint hiss of breath vibrating through his chest. I realized in that moment that he was learning a new form of patience, not the patience of survival, but the patience of presence, the patience of witnessing and responding minute by minute to the needs of another. It was a skill he had honed long before I arrived, and yet this new manifestation of it in response to the baby felt like something both ancient and entirely new. I felt the weight of my own memories pressing against me again, memories I had tried to bury, the times I had failed to notice the vulnerability of those who depended on me, the small cruelties I had inflicted unknowingly, the moments of absence that had left lasting shadows. Watching Rex and the baby interact, I felt the first stirrings of a gentle self-reckoning. Perhaps the way forward was not through grand gestures, but through sustained attention, empathy and care. Perhaps presence itself could be transformative. The mist outside began to lift slightly, sunlight filtering in through cracks in the boards, casting long, delicate shadows across the floor. The interplay of light and darkness mirrored the subtle shift taking place in the room, from isolation to connection, from vigilance to shared trust. The baby yawned, tiny hand brushing against Rex's neck, and he responded by curling slightly more tightly around her, a protective arc that spoke volumes in silence. I noticed then how his body seemed to relax incrementally with every hour spent near her. The tension in his shoulders softened his movements and became less calculated and more fluid. Even his gaze, once alert and wary, carried a softer edge, a patient curiosity that mirrored the baby's own exploration of her surroundings. It was as though her presence was teaching him the possibilities of gentleness and comfort, long denied, but never forgotten. I took a careful step closer, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. I wanted to witness and document without disturbing the delicate ecosystem of trust that had formed. The baby's fingers traced along a scar near his shoulder, and Rex let out a soft, almost imperceptible hum of acknowledgement. No growl, no tension, just recognition and acceptance. That hum lingered in the room, reverberating through the damp air like a secret song. It occurred to me then that this was not just a meeting of two beings, it was the beginning of a transformation. Rex, who had carried the weight of abandonment and struggle for so long, was learning to soften, to attune himself to another's needs. The baby who had wandered into this broken house and into his life was learning the language of trust, the rhythm of patience, and the quiet assurance that comes from being seen and protected. The afternoon light continued its slow descent, shadows, lengthening mist lingering at the edges of the windows. I remained where I was, absorbed in the subtle motions and quiet exchanges, knowing that nothing dramatic would happen here. The story was not in sudden revelations or loud declarations. It was in the measured, deliberate acts of care, in the soft pressure of fur against skin, in the mirrored breathing of two fragile, enduring lives. As the day waned, I realized that I had witnessed something rare, the initial stages of a bond that promised endurance, loyalty, and the subtle alchemy of shared survival. The baby's small hand continued to rest against Rex's side fingers, tracing faint lines along scars and muscles, while his head remained low and attentively responsive. There was no rush, no urgency, only the slow unfolding of connection, deliberate and unforced, built on patience, observation, and the quiet wisdom of endurance. The light had shifted again, golden hues bleeding into the room as the afternoon began its slow descent toward evening. The mist outside had thinned, leaving droplets clinging to the broken window panes, like scattered memories, fragile and impermanent. Rex lay beside the baby, still curled protectively around her, but I began to notice subtle changes in his demeanor. Movements that had once been deliberate and guarded now carried a softness, a quiet attentiveness that seemed almost maternal in its precision. He lifted his head occasionally to scan the room, ears twitching at distant sounds, but his gaze always returned to the baby, not with vigilance alone, but with a kind of understanding and a recognition that his responsibility extended beyond mere survival. It was a slow, deliberate transformation, as if he was discovering a new purpose, one that did not negate his past pain, but allowed him to channel it into care rather than fear. The baby shifted eyes wide as she explored the edges of the crib and the corners of the room, and Rex adjusted without hesitation, moving his body to create a safe boundary around her. I watched as he rose on his paws, stretching slowly, muscles rippling beneath damp matted fur, then settled back down, aligning his body precisely along hers. The rhythm of their shared breathing seemed to deepen, synchronized in a way that suggested trust had moved beyond instinct into something quieter and more profound. I had not noticed the change at first, but then it became impossible to ignore. He no longer flinched at distant noises and no longer hesitated at the approach of shadows or stray debris. His movements were confident and measured, but they carried a gentleness that had not been there before. The scars along his body, once a stark reminder of his struggle, seemed less a burden now and more a testament to his endurance, a silent story he was willing to share with this small, trusting presence. The baby rolled slightly, small fingers brushing against his shoulder. He responded instantly, shifting closer to accommodate her movement, head lowering to press against her side. It was a gesture so simple and unremarkable to anyone else, but in its quiet precision, it spoke volumes. Here was a dog who had lived through abandonment, hardship, and fear, now learning to adjust his own habits for the sake of another. His transformation was silent, almost imperceptible, but it radiated a quiet nobility that filled the room. I stepped closer, careful to remain unobtrusive, and watched as Rex lifted a paw, gently nudging a fallen toy toward the baby. She looked at it for a moment, eyes widening, then reached out with a tentative hand. He waited patiently for a soft whine escaping his throat, as if encouraging her to take it on her own terms. She did, fingers curling around the toy, and he exhaled slowly, a subtle vibration of contentment rippling through his chest. It was as though he was beginning to understand the nuances of interaction and guidance of quiet support. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the loose boards and whistling through cracks in the walls. Rex's ears flicked, alert but calm, and I realized that his vigilance had evolved. He was no longer hyper-aware of potential threats for his own sake alone. He was protective, now attuned to the well-being of the baby, willing to absorb danger silently and without complaint. It was a profound shift, one that spoke of loyalty, courage, and the deepening of an emotional bond that transcended words. I noticed the small ways he adjusted to her needs, shifting his position when she shifted, nudging her gently when she became uncomfortable, even lowering his head to allow her to rest against him more comfortably. It was an ongoing, subtle dance, a series of actions that could easily be overlooked, but collectively created a cocoon of safety, warmth, and trust. Watching this, I understood that trust was not given. It was earned, nurtured over time, and maintained through consistent, quiet attention. Rex was both teacher and student in this delicate, silent exchange. The baby's soft coos filled the room intermittently, breaking the heavy quiet with small musical notes of life. Rex responded with low approving hums, ears flicking in recognition of her presence and the rhythm she brought to the space. It was remarkable to witness the way he could read her signals without ever needing instruction, the way he adapted instinctively to her small gestures, movements, and breaths. In that room, surrounded by decay and sunlight, filtering through broken panes, something extraordinary was happening. A wounded soul was healing through the act of protecting another. I felt a swell of emotion rise within me, a combination of awe and quiet sorrow. This dog, battered and alone, was teaching me about resilience, patience, and the power of silent care. The room, once heavy with absence, now carried the delicate pulse of presence, each breath and movement a testament to the slow transformation of two beings finding their way back to trust. It was not a sudden miracle nor a dramatic revelation, but a carefully measured evolution that spoke to the depth of connection that could exist between creatures who had known suffering and survival. The light shifted again, fading to the soft orange of evening. Shadows stretched long across the floor, mingling with the faint mist that had settled in the corners. Rex shifted once more, laying his head gently over the baby's blanket, nudging her slightly to encourage comfort. She responded instinctively, curling closer to him, tiny fingers pressing into the fur along his side. I could see in their body language that the lines between protector and protector were beginning to blur, that they were learning from each other, adapting to each other and creating a rhythm that neither had known before. I stepped back, letting the quiet continue undisturbed. Each small action, each subtle gesture, was a chapter in their story unfolding without words, without hurrying, with the slow gravity of something inevitable. Rex's transformation was not complete yet, but it was well underway, a silent evolution from survivor to guardian, from wary observer to willing participant in a fragile, tender world. The baby, in turn, was learning the boundaries and freedoms of trust, the rhythm of shared presence, and the subtle language of patience. Outside, the first hints of twilight darkened the alleyways and streets, casting long, wavering shadows across the floor. Inside, the room remained alive with quiet movement and subtle communication. The baby shifted, eyes half closed, comforted by the warmth and presence of Rex. He adjusted instinctively, curling more tightly, head lowering, slightly breathing synchronized with hers. At that moment, nothing else existed. No past trauma, no distant danger, only the slow, deliberate healing presence of two beings discovering that trust could exist even after everything they had endured. The evening, light waned, slowly leaving long shadows to stretch across the broken floors and cracked walls of the abandoned house. I remained near the doorway, careful not to disturb the delicate rhythm Rex and the baby had established, yet unable to look away. Every subtle movement, every shift of weight, every quiet sound seemed to carry weight beyond its physical presence. Rex's body remained a protective barrier, alert, without aggression. His head lifted occasionally to scan the room, ears twitching at the softest creaks and whispers of settling wood. I noticed the nuanced changes in him more acutely now, the way his posture suggested a readiness to act, yet never overreacted. His gaze would flick toward the door whenever the faintest sound reached his ears, the muscles along his back tightening just enough to convey alertness without tension. It was not fear. It was a deliberate, measured vigilance, an instinct honed over years of necessity and survival. Watching him, I realized that his awareness had shifted. He was no longer moving solely for himself, but in service of another, attuned to the smallest shifts in her breathing or position, as if the balance of the room depended on his watchfulness. The baby stirred slightly, a soft murmur escaping her lips, and Rex responded instantly, his body shifting to maintain a protective arc around her. I could see the subtle pressure of his side against hers, a gentle containment that reassured without constriction. Her tiny fingers brushed along his fur, tracing lines over old scars, and he exhaled slowly, a quiet vibration signaling both tolerance and encouragement. In this shared rhythm, they communicated entirely without words, gestures, glances, and tactile exchanges, forming a complex language of care and trust. I felt the weight of history pressing gently in the room. This was no ordinary interaction. It was the slow emergence of a bond that had the power to heal both of them. Rex had endured abandonment, hunger, and the constant threat of harm. The baby had known fragility, dependence, and perhaps moments of uncertainty or loss, and yet here they were, learning from each other in the quietest of ways. He was teaching her trust, patience, and observation, while she reminded him of innocence, vulnerability, and the possibility of tenderness. As darkness deepened outside, the mist rolling in from the alley thickened again, curling through the cracked windows like a living presence. Rex's ears flicked toward each shift of air, the faint scratch of falling debris, the subtle creak of a loose shutter. I felt my own pulse, quickly aware of the protective energy radiating from him. But there was no panic, no urgency, only a deep, deliberate awareness, a controlled vigilance that carried the weight of experience and the new responsibility of safeguarding another life. He rose slowly, stretching with precision, muscles rippling beneath wet fur, then padded carefully to the doorway. His gaze flicked toward the street beyond, nostrils flaring as he sampled the air. The baby stirred, small whimpers escaping her lips, and he returned, instantly pressing his side against hers in a silent promise of safety. Every movement was intentionally measured and infused with empathy. I realized then that I had not merely witnessed a dog surviving. I was observing a creature evolving, learning a new form of guardianship that extended beyond instinct into moral awareness. The shadows cast by the evening light seemed to dance across the room, highlighting the contours of his body, the small indentations of his scars, the subtle changes in his posture as he remained in sync with the baby. It was mesmerizing. Each detail, the twitch of an ear, the soft rumble of breath, the careful placement of a paw, conveyed more than words could. In this silent theater, Rex was both actor and director, orchestrating the safety and emotional rhythm of the room without fanfare or recognition. I edged closer, careful to stay unobtrusive, and observed him nuzzle the baby gently, then lay his head low to the floor, eyes half closed but scanning continuously. I could sense a growing confidence in him, a trust in the balance they had established together. The transformation I had seen beginning days ago was now taking tangible form. A survivor had become a protector, a guardian whose instincts were tempered by empathy and patience. And the baby in turn responded with growing awareness, reaching instinctively to touch and reassure, absorbing lessons of vigilance and care without ever understanding them intellectually. The room seemed to settle into a delicate equilibrium. The smell of damp wood, wet fur, and faint lingering sense of past human presence mingled in the air, grounding the space in the tangible reality of survival and care. Rex's eyes flicked constantly, scanning the edges of the room and the shadows beyond the broken windows, while his body maintained a protective cocoon around her. I realized then that the essence of his silent transformation was this. He had learned to live not just for himself, but as a living guardian, constantly aware of another life intertwined with his own. Time stretched on in slow increments, punctuated only by the baby's small coos and shifts and Rex's responsive movements. I began to notice his behavior outside the immediate space as well. When a faint noise came from the street, he would glance quickly but return, indicating that the world beyond their cocoon was acknowledged but secondary. His patience and judgment were becoming sharper, refined not by fear or instinct alone, but by deliberate attention to her presence. A gust of wind rattled the windows and stirred loose debris on the floor. Rex's ears flicked, gaze darting toward the source muscles, coiling for a split second before he relaxed again. I realized that his vigilance had evolved. He was now able to discriminate between threats and normal environmental changes, adjusting his response to optimize protection without unnecessary stress. The baby stirred again, fingers brushing along his side, and he responded instantly, pressing against her, gently signaling a calm assurance that everything within their space remained safe. I knelt quietly, heart heavy with awe and a growing sense of reverence. Every small action, every subtle adjustment told a story of endurance, empathy, and the slow, deliberate evolution of trust. Rex's transformation was no longer silent. It was living, breathing, manifested in every gesture he made to accommodate and protect. The baby in turn absorbed these lessons instinctively, learning the nuances of safety care and companionship without words or instruction. By the time darkness had fully descended outside, the room had become a sanctuary. Shadows cloaked the corners, yet the space near the crib radiated warmth, trust, and connection. Rex lay partially curled around the baby head, low eyes scanning intermittently but with a calm assurance. Every breath, every movement, every subtle flick of an ear reinforced the unspoken bond that had formed, a quiet testament to resilience and the transformative power of empathy. Night had fully claimed the alley and the abandoned house, leaving the room bathed in a muted grey that softened the harsh edges of decay. The mist outside clung to the window panes, curling inside like an unwelcome whisper. I had remained near the doorway, reluctant to move too close, wanting to preserve the delicate rhythm between Rex and the baby. Their bond had settled into a steady, almost sacred cadence each breath, each subtle movement, a testament to trust and mutual understanding. But even in the quietest sanctuary, shadows could intrude. A faint sound reached my ears first, the distant scrape of a boot across concrete, muffled but deliberate. Rex's ears pricked instantly, body stiffening as he lifted his head. His amber eyes flicked toward the door, scanning the shadows beyond the broken windows. The baby stirred slightly, sensing the tension in the air, and pressed closer against him. His body responded immediately, curling slightly around her, as though to shield her from a threat she could not yet comprehend. I realized then that their bond, so carefully nurtured over the last hours and days, was about to be tested. Rex had learned to protect in the quiet, controlled environment of the room, but this intrusion, however, slightly brought the outside world in, along with all its unpredictability. He did not growl or bark, but his gaze remained sharp, muscles taut, ears angled to capture the faintest hint of danger. It was vigilance refined to perfection, an awareness born from hardship, but now applied to someone else's safety. The sound drew closer, footsteps echoing faintly against the alley walls. Rex shifted subtly, tail low, pressing his body closer to the baby, positioning himself between her and the doorway. I could see the almost imperceptible rise of his hackles, the careful adjustment of his stance, the way he had learned to judge risk, not with panic, but with calculation. Every scar on his body, every memory of survival now informed his protective instincts in real time. He was no longer acting merely to preserve himself. He was acting to preserve another. The baby stirred again, small eyes blinking up at him. She seemed to sense the tension, reaching a tiny hand toward his shoulder. He pressed his head gently against her hand, and I realized the significance of this. Even in the face of a potential threat, he had not abandoned the trust they had built. He had integrated vigilance with tenderness and instinct with care. In that moment, the room became a microcosm of the balance between fear and love, between danger and protection. I strained to listen beyond the walls, but the sounds were deliberately muted, almost as if the world itself was hesitant to intrude upon this fragile sanctuary. Then I noticed a shadow flicker across the doorway, a person careful and uncertain, unaware that their approach had already been sensed. Rex lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he inhaled the scent, and his body stiffened further. The baby pressed closer, instinctively responding to the change in his posture. I felt a tightening in my chest, a mix of fear and awe at the quiet power radiating from him. He did not bark or lunge, but his presence became a living barrier and an unspoken warning. The intruder paused, then shifted direction, perhaps sensing the silent authority Rex projected. The dog's amber eyes followed every movement, muscles coiled yet controlled, tail brushing the floor with subtle intention. I could see the logic in his restraint. Confrontation without preparation could escalate danger, but patience and positioning allowed him to manage the situation while minimizing risk. The baby yawned, tiny fingers brushing along his fur. He exhaled slowly, a vibration I could feel even from a few feet away, and I understood the duality of his focus, attuned to the threat, yet still nurturing the fragile life he had sworn to protect. It was a level of emotional intelligence that seemed almost impossible in a creature driven by instinct alone. Yet here it was manifest in the quiet calculus of his actions. Minutes stretched interminably. Every creak, every draft of wind, every shift of shadow became a potential test, and yet Rex remained unwavering. His presence created a buffer, a protective zone that allowed the baby to remain unaware of the larger uncertainties just beyond the threshold. I felt a swell of respect for him, a recognition of the years of experience and suffering that had forged this delicate equilibrium of control and compassion. Eventually the footsteps receded, fading into the alley's grey darkness. Rex remained tense for a long moment, head low but eyes scanning, nostrils flaring to catch the fading scent. Only after he had assessed that the immediate danger had passed did his body slowly relax, tail curling slightly around the baby's side, head lowering to rest gently on the floor near hers. The baby nestled closer, instinctively unconcerned, now protected by a guardian, whose vigilance was invisible to her, yet entirely effective. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest releasing only marginally. The world outside had intruded, reminding me that safety was always conditional, that trust required constant reinforcement. And yet I realized something profound. Rex's silent guardianship was not just reactive, it was deliberate, considered and emotionally intelligent. He had learned to balance care with caution, patience with protection, and in doing so had created a small, fragile world of security within the chaos beyond. The room, once again bathed in muted grey light, seemed to breathe with them, the weight of absence giving way to presence, fear tempered by trust. The baby shifted slightly, fingers tracing along his fur, and he exhaled slowly, the soft vibration echoing like a heartbeat. I realized that this was no ordinary relationship. It was a quiet covenant of resilience, a shared understanding of vulnerability, danger, and the possibility of care. As the night deepened, shadows stretched across the walls, and I remained near the doorway, silently observing. Every small movement, every subtle glance, every controlled breath was a testament to the evolution of trust and guardianship. Rex had become more than a survivor. He was a protector, a sentinel, a living embodiment of resilience tempered with tenderness. And the baby, small and unaware of the lessons she was absorbing, was becoming his counterpart in this silent, unfolding narrative of safety and connection. The night deepened outside, swallowing the alley in inky shadows that crept along the walls of the abandoned house. Inside, the room remained dim, the only light coming from faint moonlight filtered through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Mist still clung stubbornly to the edges of the glass, curling through the gaps as though hesitant to leave. Rex and the baby had settled into a rhythm of breath and movement, but the tension from the intrusion earlier lingered like a shadow just beyond reach. I remained near the doorway, unwilling to disturb their delicate balance, yet increasingly aware of the fragility of the world outside. The first real threat had not come to pass, but it had awakened an awareness in Rex that could not be undone. His instincts were sharper now, more deliberate. He shifted frequently, muscles coiled yet restrained, eyes flicking to the windows and the doorway, as if cataloguing every sound and shadow for potential danger. His transformation from survivor to protector had entered a critical phase. The quiet vigilance of guardianship had deepened into a measured readiness to respond to the unpredictable world. The baby stirred, tiny fingers brushing against the matted fur along his side. He exhaled softly, vibrating under her touch, a reminder that trust and protection were inseparable. I noticed now that he had begun subtle behaviors I had not seen before, lowering his body slightly when she moved to allow her comfort, adjusting the position of his paws to create a gentle barrier around her, even giving low approving hums when she reached toward him. These were not instinctive reactions. They were deliberate, intentional acts of care. A sudden noise outside, a distant clang. The echo of something falling made Rex lift his head sharply, ears pricking forward, eyes narrowing. The baby stirred, sensing the shift, but did not cry. Rex pressed closer, curling around her with calculated precision, positioning his body to shield her completely. The way he measured space weight and proximity struck me. He was no longer merely responding. He was strategizing, balancing alertness with reassurance and protection with calm. I thought about the stakes. The baby was small, fragile, and unaware of the dangers that lurked in the alley or beyond. Rex, scared and wary, had been thrust into a role that demanded more than instinct. He had to anticipate, calculate, and act not only for himself, but for another life entirely dependent on him. Each night brought new lessons, subtle threats that tested patience and presence, and I could feel the intensity of his focus pressing outward, shaping the room into a space of relative safety. The wind shifted again, rattling the broken boards and carrying the scent of damp earth and refuse. Rex's nose twitched as he inhaled sharply, muscles tightening just enough to signal alertness. The baby shifted slightly in response, tiny fingers seeking reassurance along his side. He exhaled slowly, a vibration of calm, and I realized the profound depth of their mutual reliance. This was no longer a one-sided protection. It was a dialogue of presence, a silent agreement forged in trust and vulnerability. Hours seemed to stretch indefinitely. I watched as he circled the perimeter of their small sanctuary, paws, barely making a sound on the dusty floor, nose close to the ground as he catalogued every scent. He paused frequently to glance at the baby, ensuring she remained undisturbed, adjusting his position in response to her subtle movements. Every gesture was carefully deliberate, a masterclass in measured guardianship. I found myself holding my breath, caught in the slow, tense rhythm of anticipation and vigilance. Outside the alley remained murky shadows deepening, but the world seemed to press closer now, its presence unavoidable. I sensed that the quiet sanctuary within the room was finite, temporary, and could be challenged at any moment. Rex's awareness had evolved further. His body language became more rigid when he detected distant movements, yet softened the instant he sensed the baby was aware of nothing. He had internalized a complex calculus of danger and reassurance, moving in ways that balanced his protective duty with the necessity of maintaining calm for the child. At one point, a faint figure moved outside, glimpsed through the cracks in the window. Rex's body tensed fully, and his low, deliberate growl rumbled from deep within. The baby stirred in response, tiny hands curling against his side, and he shifted slightly, lowering his head to press against her shoulder. The figure outside hesitated, then moved on, leaving only the echo of footsteps behind. Rex exhaled slowly, muscles relaxing fractionally, yet his gaze remained sharp, scanning the alley with quiet intensity. I felt an emotional weight pressing down on me, an awareness that even though immediate danger had passed, the intrusion had introduced a new variable into their lives. Trust and vigilance could coexist, but the balance was delicate. Any sudden disturbance could shatter it, and I sensed that this fragile equilibrium was being tested repeatedly by the world outside, unseen, yet inexorably present. The baby yawned, settling further against his side. Rex shifted subtly to accommodate her, adjusting the curve of his body to create a tighter protective arc. I observed his patience, the deliberate care in every movement, and the way he had learned to modulate his presence according to her small, unconscious cues. This was no longer simple guardianship. It was an ongoing negotiation of space, attention, and trust, forged in the crucible of necessity and experience. I realized that what had begun as a bond formed out of accident and survival was evolving into something much deeper. The baby had become a mirror to Rex's transformation, teaching him not only how to protect, but how to temper vigilance with tenderness. Every subtle shift, every measured adjustment, every soft hum of breath or touch of paw had become part of a language only they understood. Night deepened further shadows, stretching long across the broken floor. Mist lingered, pressing against the edges of the windows and curling through the room in delicate tendrils. Rex remained alert yet calm, head resting near the baby body, forming a protective barrier, eyes scanning the subtle shifts in light and shadow. The world outside was unpredictable and often threatening, yet inside this fragile sanctuary, trust, patience, and presence had carved a space for quiet resilience. The first hints of dawn seeped through the fractured windows, painting the room in muted shades of grey and gold. Shadows receded slowly, yet the sense of unease that had settled over the night refused to dissipate entirely. Rex remained curled around the baby, alert, even as her tiny breaths deepened in sleep. The soft rise and fall of her chest was a steady rhythm anchoring him in ways I could only begin to comprehend. He had become more than a survivor, more than a protector. He was the invisible sentinel guarding her world, sensing threats that the human mind might overlook entirely. I moved closer, hesitant yet compelled to bear witness, knowing that the quiet vigil of the night had already changed everything. The baby stirred slightly, murmuring, and Rex adjusted instinctively, nuzzling her shoulder with careful gentleness. His amber eyes flicked toward the doorway, scanning, measuring and calculating. Outside, the world was waking, carrying with it sounds of distant traffic, shifting wind, and the occasional stray animal. Each movement or noise pulled at his attention, yet his body remained tethered to the child, a living barrier against uncertainty and danger. Hours passed in an almost suspended rhythm. The baby slept oblivious to the delicate calculations playing out beside her. Rex's posture remained tense in all the right places and relaxed in the right places, a masterclass in measured guardianship. I could see how far he had come from the broken, wary creature I had first encountered days ago. Yet even as he had grown into this role, the world outside pressed closer to a subtle, persistent weight that tested the limits of his vigilance. It was then that the first true confrontation emerged, not loud, not sudden, but deliberate and unavoidable. A knock at the door, hesitant but insistent, echoed through the fragile stillness of the room. Rex's ears twitched and his body stiffened immediately. His amber eyes locked on the source, scanning for cues, calculating the appropriate response. The baby stirred slightly in her sleep, sensing the tension, and Rex lowered his head, pressing his body closer to shield her. The knock came again, firmer this time, and I could feel the pulse of uncertainty ripple through the room. I remained silent, holding my breath, unsure of the identity of the visitor, or the consequences their arrival might bring. Rex had never failed to protect, yet the stakes now were different. This was a human intrusion, carrying with it unpredictability, authority, and potential judgment. The dog's instincts were acute, his vigilance flawless, yet even he could not anticipate the will and intentions of another mind. Slowly the door creaked open. A figure appeared in the threshold, silhouetted against the pale light of early morning. The stranger paused, eyes adjusting to the dim interior, unaware that their every movement had been catalogued by a pair of amber eyes. Rex rose slowly, muscles coiled, positioned carefully between the intruder and the baby. He did not growl or bark, but the quiet intensity of his presence carried a warning that required no words. The baby stirred once more, tiny hands reaching instinctively for the reassuring presence of fur and warmth. The stranger stepped forward cautiously, and I felt the weight of decision pressing down. This was not merely a choice for the dog, it was a test of the bond we had all formed. Any sudden movement or any miscalculation could shatter the fragile equilibrium of trust, exposing the baby to risk and Rex to stress. And yet the potential for connection, for salvation, existed here as well if handled with care and patience. Rex's gaze never wavered from the stranger's amber eyes, steady, calculating, aware of every subtle shift. He moved only slightly, a measured repositioning that expanded his protective barrier while maintaining a calm, deliberate stance. The baby stirred in response, her tiny hand brushing along his side, and he exhaled slowly, a soft vibration of reassurance that seemed to speak directly to both her and the human intruder. I realized at that moment that this confrontation was as much about emotional courage as physical presence. The dog had learned to read the room, to balance vigilance with tenderness, to protect without aggression. The baby in turn had internalized the rhythm of his care, responding instinctively to his cues, and I, the human observer, was confronted with a decision of my own, to act, to intervene, to bridge the gap between this delicate, self-contained world and the unpredictable realities beyond. The stranger moved closer, hesitating as their eyes adjusted to the dim light. I held my breath, sensing the critical juncture. Rex shifted slightly, adjusting his posture, muscles coiled yet fluid, a testament to his training and instinct. He was ready to defend, yet not to escalate unnecessarily. His presence alone communicated the boundaries of the room, the rules of engagement, written in silence, in measured motion, in the calibrated tension of every limb and gaze. Slowly the intruder spoke in a low and careful voice. It was not threatening, but it carried authority, the kind of authority that demanded attention without commanding violence. I felt the shift in Rex immediately, a subtle relaxation tempered by continued vigilance. He understood that not all humans carried immediate danger, that some could be negotiated with through posture, presence, and intent. It was a moment that crystallized the quiet intelligence of his transformation, the fusion of instinct and empathy into deliberate, controlled action. The baby stirred again, eyes half opening, and Rex responded without hesitation, lowering his head to nuzzle her gently, ensuring she remained calm. The intruder froze for a heartbeat, then slowly extended a hand, careful not to startle the dog. Rex sniffed cautiously, every movement deliberate, every muscle coiled in quiet anticipation. The tension hung in the air, a taut string waiting for a note that would release it. And then slowly, deliberately, he exhaled, a low vibration rolling through his chest. The subtle relaxation in his posture signaled a decision. The threat had been assessed, the danger mitigated, and the room remained secure. The baby yawned, settling deeper into his protective arc, unaware of the delicate dance that had just occurred. I felt the weight of relief press upon me, mingled with awe at the quiet, deliberate intelligence that had governed every second of the encounter. In that quiet, muted light, I realized that Rex had become more than a protector. He had become a teacher, showing the possibilities of trust, patience, and measured response, even in the face of uncertainty. And the baby, small and fragile, had absorbed the lesson in ways that were subtle but profound. The world could be navigated safely, Fear could coexist with comfort, and bonds could carry the weight of both vigilance and love. The dawn had fully matured into a muted morning grey light, filtering through the broken windows in a soft, even wash. Mist lingered stubbornly at the edges of the room, curling around the corners, like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold. The air was heavy with the residue of the night's tension, a silence charged with expectation. Rex lay beside the baby, his body a living shield, eyes flicking constantly toward the doorway, amber orbs sharp and focused, yet tempered by a calm patience that had grown steadily over days. I moved slowly toward them, careful not to break the fragile. Equilibrium. Each step on the cracked wooden floor echoed faintly, yet Rex did not flinch. His ears twitched at the faintest sound, muscles coiled, but never rigid. The baby stirred slightly, yawning, curling closer against his side. Every subtle shift in his posture was a deliberate balance between vigilance and comfort, between readiness to respond and reassurance that her small world remained secure. Then the knock came again, deliberate, insistent, carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to silence or hesitation. Rex lifted his head immediately, body stiffening, tail lowering in subtle calculation. He pressed closer to the baby, curling protectively. His amber gaze fixed on the door as if measuring intent, assessing threat, weighing consequence. The baby's small fingers brushed along his side, seeking calm, and he exhaled slowly, the soft vibration of his breath, a quiet promise that she would remain safe. I realized then that this was the true test, not merely of Rex's instincts, but of the bond that had been painstakingly cultivated. He had transformed from survivor to guardian, but this confrontation demanded judgment beyond instinct alone. Every decision, every movement carried weight. The wrong choice could break the delicate trust, exposing the baby to harm, or fracturing the confidence Rex had learned to extend. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the figure silhouetted against the growing daylight. Their eyes adjusted to the dim interior, hesitating as they took in the room, unaware that every subtle movement had already been catalogued. Rex shifted slightly, just enough to create a barrier, muscles taut but fluid, head lowered to maintain proximity to the baby. He did not growl, did not bark. His presence alone spoke volumes, conveying authority, caution, and readiness, without aggression. The intruder's voice broke the silence, low and careful each word. "I'm not here to hurt you," they said, though the tone carried the unmistakable weight of authority. Rex's ears flicked, amber eyes narrowing, assessing the rhythm and intention of the words. He remained between the intruder and the baby body, coiled tail brushing lightly against the floor. The subtle tension in the room was almost palpable, a measured balance between threat and reassurance. The baby stirred, small eyes blinking, seeking the familiar comfort of fur and warmth. Rex pressed his head gently against her shoulder, exhaling slowly, a vibration of calm that reassured both of us. The intruder paused, noticing the quiet authority emanating from him, the calculated restraint in every muscle and movement. They extended a hand cautiously, careful not to provoke, and Rex sniffed, once deliberate, slow, weighing the scent, measuring the intent, yet never breaking his protective arc around the child. I watched, my heart tight with anticipation, as the dynamics in the room shifted subtly. This was no longer just about vigilance or instinct. It was about trust, about the ability to read and respond to the intention, to negotiate safety without words or aggression. The baby pressed closer instinctively, tiny fingers brushing along his shoulder, and he exhaled again, muscles relaxing fractionally, signaling an assessment. The immediate threat had been mitigated, but the need for vigilance remained. The intruder's voice softened, steady but cautious. "So you've done well," they said, acknowledging the silent guardianship that had been so carefully executed. Rex remained alert, but allowed a small relaxation in his posture, head lowering slightly, tail brushing the floor in gentle reassurance. The baby yawned and settled deeper into his protective curl, unaware of the tension that had passed, absorbed instead by the security of his presence. It was then that I realized the depth of what had unfolded. Rex had navigated this delicate encounter, with precision, balancing instinct, empathy, and judgment. He had protected, assessed, and responded with a measured intelligence that went beyond survival. He had become the living embodiment of patience and trust, a guardian whose presence alone could negotiate safety in a world of uncertainty. I knelt quietly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down. The baby's breathing had returned to a calm, steady rhythm, and Rex's body mirrored that return to equilibrium, muscles, relaxed yet ready. The intruder had paused, waiting, recognizing the silent code that governed this fragile sanctuary. Every movement, every gesture, every subtle shift in weight had communicated volumes of trust, protection, vigilance, and the quiet assertion that the safety of another life could not be compromised. As the morning light strengthened, revealing the cracks in the walls, the worn floorboards and the lingering mist, a profound stillness settled over the room. The first challenge, the true test of guardianship and bond, had passed not with confrontation but with measured presence, patience, and deliberate action. Rex's transformation was complete in its quiet majesty. He was no longer merely a survivor, no longer merely protective. He was a sentient guardian, a teacher, a stabilizing force for both the baby and the fragile human observing them. The intruder finally withdrew, leaving the door ajar, respect in their measured retreat. Rex remained close to the baby, head lowered, eyes scanning the room once more before finally allowing the faintest relaxation to seep into his posture. The baby exhaled, settling fully, fingers curling instinctively against his fur, absorbing the quiet lesson of vigilance and reassurance. I realized then that this was the culmination not of action but of presence, trust, and emotional intelligence. The bond they had forged, fragile, painstakingly built, tested under the pressures of threat and uncertainty, had proven itself resilient. In the slow, deliberate unfolding of trust and protection, a quiet miracle had occurred. The wounded guardian had found purpose beyond survival. The baby had learned instinctively the rhythms of safety and care, and I witnessed to it all, had learned the depth of what it meant to bear silent witness to courage, patience, and unwavering loyalty. The room had settled into a rare kind of stillness, one that felt more fragile than any tension we had endured the night before. Dawn had yielded to morning's soft light spilling through the broken windows in golden shafts that dusted the room in warmth. Mist clung to the edges of the boards, lingering, as if reluctant to release the quiet magic that had unfolded here. Rex remained beside the baby, curling around her small frame like a living shield, muscles relaxed yet vigilant, head resting lightly near hers. The rhythm of her breathing had become the anchor of the room, synchronizing subtly with the rise and fall of his chest, a quiet, unspoken testament to trust and mutual understanding. I watched them for a long moment, hesitant to disturb the fragile equilibrium. The events of the previous night had left marks invisible to the eye, but indelible in the memory. The knock, the presence of an intruder, the delicate navigation of threat, all of it tested the bond between them, stretching patience and vigilance to their limits. And yet here they were, a dog and a child bound by trust, patience, and instinct, quietly teaching each other about safety, comfort, and presence. The baby shifted slightly, small fingers brushing along Rex's side. He exhaled softly, a low vibration that seemed to reassure her as much as it reassured me. The air was filled with a tension that had transformed into tranquility, a slow, deliberate peace forged through the trials of the night and the subtle evolution of guardianship. His amber eyes flicked toward the doorway, once then back at her, scanning not for immediate danger, but to ensure the balance of the room remained undisturbed. I thought of all that had led us here. The fractured past Rex carried the nights of uncertainty and survival, the delicate first moments of trust that had grown into something profound. And I realized that the real transformation had not occurred solely in his body or actions. It had been emotional, spiritual, and shared. He had learned to measure fear with care, to protect without aggression, to nurture.